Should I change myself for others? I hear different versions of this question asked a lot by people in the autistic community. Should I change myself to fit in? Am I being too rigid? Should I insist that other people accommodate me? Should I bother trying with relationships at all when people don't seem to be able to accept the real me? Very good questions, very important questions, and yet there is a very simple answer. The answer is absolutely, most definitely, yes, but only a little bit. And that's where things get really interesting. Today's video is sponsored by the short-form app for great summaries of books and other resources. Hi everyone, Paul Mikolev here from Autism from the Inside. I make weekly videos sharing the human side of autism, so make sure you hit subscribe to get the latest content. One of my favorite kind of paradoxical sayings is that the simple things in life are often the most difficult. And this question is a really good example of that. It's fairly intuitively obvious that if I do my own thing all the time without any regard for other people around me, without any attempt to try and fit in or try and participate in my community, then essentially I'm choosing to be almost infinitely rigid, not allowing myself to be influenced by anyone else around me. And in a way, I'm rejecting the world in advance because unless they can accept me completely as I am without changing a tiny aspect of my personality or my preferences or my anything, then that's not good enough for me, which is clearly an impossible task. How can anyone fully cater to me, fully accommodate me, fully be in tune with me and understand every one of my needs and preferences at any given time? That's so unlikely that it might as well be impossible, and we can basically rule that out as an effective strategy. Similarly, what if I were to be as flexible as I possibly can and blend into every situation that I find myself in? We call that being a chameleon, constantly molding myself to suit everyone around me. And if I'm doing that, then I've kind of lost all sense of who I am, since who I am in any given moment is fully dependent on the situation and on other people, rather than on anything intrinsic to myself. So in that sense, the fairly basic intuitive answer is that I obviously can't always be changing myself to suit others. And equally, I can't be infinitely rigid and refuse to change for other people at all, which is why the answer to this question of should I change for others is absolutely, most definitely, yes. We need to change a little bit, but not too much. And that second part of the answer is where things start to get a bit more nuanced. So you might have noticed that what we've done so far is basically change the problem from a black and white, should I do this, yes or no, to a much more nuanced question of how much should I do this and what and when are the best ways for me to change and what parts of myself do I change and how do I change those parts in different situations. So that is a much, much, much more nuanced question. And the reason I focused on disambiguating that from the first question is because very often I notice in our community, it's a stereotype as well, it's so easy to fall into that black and white thinking category. And as we saw from the start, both extremes are equally problematic. Now, there's a really interesting thing about this more nuanced way to think about the question. Actually, we now have two goals in any situation, two questions that I need to be asking. The first one is, how much am I going to change in this situation? How much am I going to be accommodating to another person? And the second equally important question is, how much am I going to ask or expect the other person, the situation, the society, the group, the community, the environment, the whatever it is, how much am I going to expect the other person to accommodate me and change for me in the situation? And both of those things follow equally logically from the same thing. If we've established that it's a good thing for me to be considerate of other people, then it follows that it's an equally good thing for other people to be considerate of me. Now, you might be thinking this sounds like really basic common sense, but there are so many examples of where people, and not just autistic people, fall into one of these black and white categories, at the expense of the relationship too, nonetheless. I was chatting to someone the other day who was telling me how her mother was trying to get her to change. And this is quite common. Very often the burden of change, the burden of accommodation is put onto the autistic person with the reasoning that, well, this situation works for everyone else, so it should work for you. Therefore, because it's not working for you, you must be the one with the problem, and you need to accommodate everyone else. You need to find a way to do something so that you can mold yourself to fit into this situation because it works for everyone else. And in this case, there was a very similar argument that, well, my communication style, my demands, my needs, my requests, whatever, I don't have any problem with any other person. I only have a problem with you and our relationship. So that must be the problem. You must be the problem because I don't have this problem with other people. That kind of thinking is an example of the black and white thinking I was describing earlier, where the person has come to the conclusion that there is nothing wrong with their strategy and they don't need to change at all. And people like that expect us to do all of the work and meet them 100% of the way. And as we established earlier, that is not a functional solution, which means if you find yourself in that situation, it is 100% necessary to insist that the other person meets you at least part of the way. And once we break this black and white thinking, this question of which one of us is going to change, which one of us is going to be accommodating, to the more nuanced question of, okay, we are definitely both going to be accommodating. So what does that look like? Then we can start having a more productive conversation of, well, what can I do to be as accommodating as I can in this situation? What can you do to be as accommodating to me and my needs in this situation at the same time? This phenomenon, this dynamic of expecting the other person to change for you is not restricted to the autistic community. John Gottman wrote a famous book called 7 Principles of Making Marriage Work. And one of the principles, and I know I'm summarizing, I'm simplifying, but it's basically let your partner influence you. Don't be so rigid, even on things that you feel really, really strongly about. Allow your partner to influence you a little bit. And the reason for that is pretty obvious, like we've said before, because if you don't do that, then there is no chance for making the relationship work. If one or both of you is refusing to be influenced by the other person, refusing to change at all, then there's not really a way forward there because you've 100% shut off the way to potentially find a working solution. There are some other interesting dynamics here of common situations where a similar pattern tends to play out. One example is when you find yourself as the odd one out in a given situation. For me, for example, I don't like the cold, I don't like feeling the cold, and one of my arch nemeses in life is air conditioning. I once lived in Malaysia for 6 months, and I did not leave the house ever without an extra warm layer, because if I had to sit in a room or go to a shopping center or anything like that, then I would be freezing if I dressed for outside without bringing a jacket with me. And so that's an example of if everyone else is comfortable in the environment and I am not comfortable in the environment, can I ask everyone else to change the environment to suit me so that I'm comfortable, but they're all uncomfortable? They're all going, oof, it's pretty hot in here. I'm not really feeling comfortable. And I'm like, oh, it's fine. It's only 30 degrees. I'll be right. It doesn't really feel like I can do that. And what that leads to is a chronic undervaluing of my own needs. I build up the habit of accommodating other people's needs and not asking them to accommodate my needs. And maybe that's okay in some situations, but probably if I had a little bit more self-awareness of this, there would be lots and lots of times where I could actually ask, hey, can we turn the music down a little bit? Hey, can we do something about the lights in here? Hey, is there a way to get some more airflow in here because I'm not feeling that comfortable for any reason? And if I'm more aware of that and I have this philosophy that I'm supposed to be expecting other people to be considerate of me, and that's a good thing, that's an equally good thing as me being considerate of other people, then maybe I would expect others to change for me more often. Another dynamic that I see quite often, and I've personally experienced as well, is when one person doesn't have very strong preferences. So I personally am fairly okay with most things most of the time, which means that when I do want to do something or when something's a little bit annoying, it's not a super strong preference. Do you want milk in your tea? Yeah, whatever. Do you want sugar in your coffee? Yeah, whatever. I don't really mind too much on most things. Which means if I am around people who do have very strong preferences, what ends up happening is that I say, well, you feel very strongly about this and I don't feel that strongly about this. So let's just go with your preference because you'll really appreciate it in this situation. And as a once-off, there's nothing wrong with that. However, it is very easy for that to become a pattern of, well, your preferences are always much stronger than mine. You either really, really want something and it feels a bit hard to ask you to be so disappointed, or you really, really don't want something and it doesn't feel right for me to impose what I feel like in this situation because you really don't want it. So what that means is I end up doing everything you want to do and forgetting that it's actually fair and it makes sense that we sometimes, at least sometimes, if not more like 50% of the time, do what I feel like and what I want to do and avoid the things that I find annoying. I did an interesting calculation once on this where I imagined that there were two people in a relationship and one person always had an 8 out of 10 desire and a 2 out of 10 aversion for something. So the preferences were always really strong, either 8 out of 10 or 2 out of 10. And then the other person, the preferences were either 6 out of 10 or 4 out of 10. Right? So I could go one way or I could go the other way. I do have a preference, but it's not always very strong. And I just crunched the numbers on this because I was curious, how often should you go with the preferences of the one who has the really strong 8 out of 10 or 2 out of 10? And actually, the answer is 50% of the time. If 50% of the time you go with the strong opinion and 50% of the time you go with the meh, I have a slight opinion, then it actually balances out. And if you go with the person with the strong opinion all the time, it very, very quickly becomes out of balance. And you see it very quickly in the numbers that the person with the not so strong opinion is being quite hard done by this situation. I personally like numbers and I put it in a spreadsheet and I did a little calculation and that was really fun. And it was just a revolutionary thought because in the moment, in any one given situation, it can feel like it's better to do what the other person wants. But actually, the answer mathematically is 50% of the time. And I'm thinking, wow, could I insist on my preference 50% of the time, even though my preference is only slightly and I feel like everyone else cares about this more? So that was a bit of a challenge for me, and I've been practicing voicing my opinion more often, practicing asking or at least verbalizing something so that I'm not just holding it in and pretending that I'm fine with the situation. And all because the answer to the question of should I change for others is most definitely yes. How much is a really challenging question, but the answer is definitely more than 0. So if I find myself hovering very close to the 0, then I should definitely change myself a little bit for others. If I find myself hovering very close to the 100% of the time, where I'm always doing things for other people and not expecting them to do things for me, then I need to be really conscious of trying to bring my own needs to the situation. So anyway, I might leave it there. Thanks for watching today. If you'd like a really concise summary of that book I mentioned by John Gottman, The 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work, you might like to try this week's video sponsor, the short form book summary app, where you can get concise details of the high-level takeaways of books like this and many, many other resources. I'll leave a link in the description if you'd like to get a free trial of that. Otherwise, thanks for watching. I'm curious to hear how you solve this problem in your own life. Do you find yourself changing too much for others or maybe not enough? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your experience. So thanks for watching today. I hope you enjoyed this video and I will see you again next week. Bye.